This video is brought to you by Squarespace. What's going on, guys? RBG here, hitting you with some gaming news. Just a little over 24 hours ago during Gamescome 2019, Sony announced that they acquired Spider-Man PS4's development team, Insomniac Games, making them the 14th internal studio to join Sony Interactive Entertainment's roster at the company's worldwide studios. Like, Sony has been rolling out a lot of money buying these big-name developers because they know that the demand is still high for exclusives. That's basically the driving force behind purchasing a console, so you can play a game that you can't play on any other device. And this is some big news because it confirms that we are more than likely going to get a sequel for Marvel Spider-Man, which was a given because it sold over 3 million units in the first 3 days of its release, beating out other popular Sony exclusives like the new God of War. And as of this month, they hit a total of 13 million copies sold. So that's a pretty good reason for Sony to acquire Marvel Spider-Man's devs. This also determines the fate of future Insomniac titles and where they will go. Now, we have to go back 20 years because, as you're all aware, Insomniac and Sony have had a well-documented relationship. What's funny is that you would think that Insomniac was always a first-party studio under the Sony umbrella, because if you look at their game development history, a good majority of it consists of Sony exclusives with a handful of multi-platform games. So they've basically been an independent studio that has had a long-standing relationship with Sony. One thing that I think they've benefited from with making games on the PlayStation is having the resources and creative freedom to do what they want. Sony was more than willing to put a great deal of money for Marvel Spider-Man's development as well as its marketing, and it really shows because the game only got better in the visuals department and the marketing campaign was insane. Like, whenever there was an E3 conference, you could bet your last waifu body pillow that Sony would find some way to squeeze in a showcasing for Marvel Spider-Man. Now, according to Sony Interactive Entertainment's chairman, the day-to-day operations of Insomniac are expected to run by the current management team in conjunction with Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide Studios, San Mateo's studio. They went on to say that Insomniac is one of the most highly acclaimed development studios in the industry, and their legacy of best-in-class storytelling and gameplay is unparalleled. And that's another reason I think Sony wanted to completely cement their relationship with Insomniac, because they're really focused on telling a good story and giving you that epic single-player experience. They've proven time after time that single-player games are and will always be sustainable if they're given the right development. And for the longest time, this philosophy seemed to be the exact opposite for companies like Microsoft, who are more focused on the multiplayer aspect with their older first-party titles. And since we're on the topic of Microsoft, I wanted to talk about how Sony's acquisition of Insomniac could potentially affect them somewhere down the line. Last year, I did a somewhat controversial video that essentially started up a flame war in the comments because I talked about how Microsoft fans were upset about Marvel Spider-Man only being exclusive on the PS4 and not available on the Xbox One. People felt like Sony deliberately made Marvel Spider-Man exclusive to ostracize Xbox owners from experiencing the game for themselves. And I mentioned how I thought it was foolish to even assume this. Like, it's bad enough that gamers essentially tie their identities to these devices and slam others who own something different from them. As I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons why we even buy consoles in the first place is to experience their awesome exclusives. If I remember correctly, the Marvel Spider-Man PS4 bundle sold like crazy because of how much buzz the game was getting, and the simple fact that the red Spider-Man console looked dope. But anyways, I gave reasons as to why Spider-Man was exclusive to the PS4, stating that it was because Sony owned the Spider-Man rights, but I was a little incorrect on that info. Sony doesn't flat out own the character of Spider-Man, they only own the film rights. Everything else associated with the characters like merch, media, etc. is owned by Marvel. And this is who you should be pointing the finger at, because Marvel basically handed Sony the gaming license to Spider-Man. And this was around a time when Marvel decided to go about their video game strategy differently, because for years they'd licensed their properties out to publishers like Activision. And while there were good games that came out of that partnership, there were a lot of duds, which included these Rush movie tie-in games. So now that that partnership with Activision has ended, Marvel wanted to start off strong and they began licensing their properties off to other companies like Sony. Sony would then go to Insomniac and ask them which character they wanted to make a game for, and they ultimately chose Spider-Man. It's as plain and simple as that. Marvel picked Sony, Sony picked Insomniac, and Insomniac picked Spidey. And as I mentioned earlier, Sony put their own money into the game's budget and marketing, so there was no way in hell they were going to allow it to be on any other console but the PlayStation 4. Like, that would be stupid on them to do. That's like Microsoft pouring all their money into something like Gears and putting it on the PS4 and Nintendo. See how that works? Now, admittedly, I was a little underwhelmed that Marvel Spider-Man wasn't going to be available on all platforms because I would have loved to play it on the PC. I can only imagine how fun it would have been to mod the game and play in full native 4K 60 frames per second. And I thought we could have gotten a sequel on all platforms because Marvel does own the license to the character. Not to mention that Insomniac Games was still an independent development studio, so that meant that Marvel could choose to just do business directly through Insomniac and they could make it a multi-platform game. But now that Sony owns the company, I think it's safe to say that Marvel Spider-Man will continue to be a PS4 exclusive moving forward. So things still don't look good for Xbox owners who had their fingers crossed about playing with the web slinger. Another thing that I thought about was the Sunset Overdrive property. Back in 2011, Insomniac was planning to develop it for PlayStation consoles, but they wanted full ownership of the property, so Sony opted out and Sunset Overdrive ended up on the Xbox One. And Microsoft pretty much allowed them to keep the license, which means one thing: if Insomniac owns Sunset Overdrive and Sony owns Insomniac, that means that Sony ultimately owns Sunset Overdrive. So if you're an Xbox owner who just so happened to love Sunset Overdrive and couldn't wait for its sequel, add that to the list of exclusives you can't play unless you owned a PlayStation 4. And based on Sunset Overdrive's less than stellar sales, I don't think Sony will be rushing to come out with a sequel anytime soon. Now that they have a tight grip on Insomniac and an ensured exclusive sequel for Marvel Spider-Man, I don't think they even have a need for the Sunset Overdrive property. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little sad because I want other console owners to experience how awesome Marvel Spider-Man was. But unfortunately, it looks like they never will. So this is both a win and a loss for the gaming community. Because on one hand, we're getting another awesome Spider-Man game that'll have just as much good quality as the first one. But on the other hand, that means that Xbox One owners will now be missing out on two properties: Spider-Man and Sunset Overdrive. It's obvious that Sony sees how lucrative Spider-Man can be in games. They've been absolutely killing the movie divisions with films like Into the Spider-Verse that landed them an Oscar. And Spider-Man Far From Home just became the first Spidey film to gross over $1 billion. At the time of me making this video, it's just been rumored that Sony has just ended their deal with Marvel Studios regarding their uses of the character. So there is no doubt that they're gonna milk the hell out of Spider-Man. But anyways guys, what do you think about this news? Do you think it's great that Sony decided to seal the deal and buy out Insomniac Games? And how do you feel about Marvel Spider-Man never seeing the light of day on Xbox console? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, I ask that you rate the video. It doesn't have to be a thumbs up, it can be a thumbs down. Any feedback is good feedback and will only help me improve on future content. But if you really enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you shared it with your friends and followers on social media and other domains. Speaking of domains, if you're looking for a way to create a website, then you should really consider checking out Squarespace. It makes creating a digital domain or website fun and easy for those who are a little intimidated by the creative process. Their world-class design team basically does the hard part for you, providing you with cool looking templates that you can customize to your liking. They also have great search engine optimization and a traffic overview feature that allows you to track info like the amount of views you get on your page. It's that easy. So you should definitely head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/RandomBlackGamer to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The link will be in the description so you have no excuse. But this is your boy RBG signing out on another video. I will catch you guys later. Peace out.